Hi, Madhu.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Yeah.
Hello,
Morning.
Doctor. Hello,
Good
Dr.
morning.
Aneja.
How are you,
Good morning to
Kumar?
you, Dr. Aneja. How are you?
Morning. Good seeing you all.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Good evening, sir.
Good
Good
evening.
morning.
How are you,
Morning,
Murli?
sir.
Hi, Murli.
Yeah. Good morning, Aneja, sir.
Well, it's pretty early in the morning here. It's
Yes, sir.
4:30.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening, Murali.
Good evening, Madhu. Yeah.
So we have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I can wait for 5 minutes.
Yes. So all mics are okay, microphones and speakers, Aneja, sir. Shiv.
Looks like
I
that we
can
are
hear
able
you
to
all.
hear each
Can you
other.
hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Yeah, we can hear you well also.
Yes.
Seems
Wonderful.
fine.
Yeah. No, it is very kind of you, sir, to be able to up at 4:30 or something, 4 o'clock.
Yes.
Well, I usually get up at 4 and I said, why should I not be prepared to share whatever I have to share at early morning. So
Right, sir.
I'm only hoping I will not go to sleep.
You are in the Brahma Muhurta, sir.
Yes, you're in Brahma Muhurta, yeah.
Yes.
And also, at this point of time, kids are, they are not going to school anyway today.
Right.
There are no pressures on the bandwidth.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
Everybody's working from home, and so sometimes you have a problem with the bandwidth, but not at this time.
So worked
I've
well.
not seen you, Shiv Kumar, for a long time.
Yeah, for a very long time. Although I have seen some of your videos of your speeches at other events more recently. But yeah, a long time we haven't exchanged also.
Yeah, I am hoping maybe January, February, when it is safer to return. I'm hoping to go back to IRMA and Puttaparthi.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's see. Swami willing.
We will be recording entire thing, sir. So then that will be made available. So we may not get big audience, but it is because the circulation is going to be there anyway.
YouTube. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's days of asynchronous consumption of media.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Are things returning back to India as far as COVID is concerned? Back to normal or new normal?
Yeah, new normal. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There's some threat, but we don't know. I don't think it will rectify.
Yeah, this round doesn't seem to be as bad as it is in some countries in Europe and back in China and all that. I think we have had our tougher part in April, May this year. I think after that, we haven't seen bad situation.
Well, we had our booster shot yesterday.
Okay.
And things are not too bad here, although the numbers are going up here, which I think is which will be brought under control. But there are enough number of people anywhere in the world who are denying the whole thing and will not take these shots.
Yeah.
And it's becoming increasingly difficult for them. You can't enter any place without showing that you are you have
Vaccinated.
had. Yes.
I think given the population size and otherwise the kind of not so good execution there, I think we have done a decent job of vaccination.
I would think so. You know, my only worry is like everything seemed to be normal last year around March.
Yeah.
And then suddenly things took a turn for the worst. I lost my brother, my wife lost her sister.
Oh.
And, you know, it was a very sad period.
Yeah, those 2 months were really.
Hopefully, you know, it doesn't repeat.
That
So
won't repeat, yeah.
we are being very, well, you know, our daughters won't let us go until
Yeah.
they are sure that things are returning to normal.
Yeah, I think if you see through this month, which is with all the festivities and a few by-elections late last month, I think if you see that through, I think we should be okay. 2-3 weeks after the Diwali and Chhath Puja and all that is what we're really putting as a border to assess.
Yeah, absolutely right. You know, we're also looking at what happens in the next couple of weeks. Okay, Murli, would you like me to start or what would you like me to do now?
Murli, you're on mute.
No, Murli is on mute.
Yeah, we'll just bring you into the picture, sir. Yeah. Yeah, good morning all. Good morning, good evening. Yeah, both of them. Yeah, we have this session in remembering Dr. Kurien 100 years. He enters 100 years completes 100 years this year. So we have one person who has seen the growth of dairy board from 1968 to 1992, 25 years or so, looking at least 3 or 4 important events. One is starting of dairy board, second is Operation Flood, third is the Operation Golden Flow edible oils, and fourth is market intervention, and also starting of IRMA and IRMA growing. In 5 events, Dr. Aneja has been very closely associated. So we'll listen to him from that perspective. What are the lessons he is able to offer in the current agriculture scenario, particularly chemical free? We want to get out of chemicals. We want to have chemical free agriculture in the world. If that is the scenario, what is to be done in terms of the equivalent of dairy board, in terms of the equivalent of Operation Flood, equivalent of intervention operations, equivalent of IRMA, what all we require given the experience of 25 years of dairy board. So that is the one expectation, and Shiv, our batch 2 IRMA graduate, will be able to reflect on that, and will also bring us some elements of learning, because he's also on the board of IRMA. I'll take you through that, but before that, let us spend some time listening to understanding what Dr. Kurien has done. Dr. Kurien has been a legend. We don't have to say Everest is a, you don't have to pat the Everest. So he has been a legend. He has inspired many of us. When I wanted to join IRMA and I want to attend interview, Dr. Aneja, Ms. Patel were there. And I said, I want to join Dr. Kurien rather than you. So then they asked me a question, why Dr. Kurien, why not us? Then I said, Dr. Kurien is Dr. Kurien. So I want to join hands. But incidentally, I ended up working with Dr. Aneja in the market intelligence and operation as my first job after IRMA. So it is a double benefit for me. I'm able to remember the legend and remember the guru at the same time. And Dr. Kurien's birthday is now a National Milk Day, and he is considered father of white revolution. He has made India become self-reliant by about 97 in about 32 years after starting NDDB in 1964 at the instance of Shastriji. Anand Pattern Cooperative, 3-tier, maybe 4th-tier NCDFI, replicated nationwide. Some states did very well, some states didn't do well, but we became self-sufficient. And subsequently, after Golden Flow and MIO, self-sufficient edible oils has come, and now we seem to have lost it again. So we may have to do something about it. And from the Samarkand days, first cooperative in Samarkand to 1949, Dr. Kurien joining Amul, Anand and Jain joining Amul thereafter. It is a very big work spreading over 50 years, maybe more than 50 years. He left GCMF in 2006. So something like 57 years he has spent in Anand. And I think I was told, SK was telling me other day, sir, you write a letter, Dr. Kurien Anand, it reaches him. So you don't try to write anything more. So that's the kind of a legendary figure he was. And yes, there were troubles. Shastriji didn't give money, he only given the goodwill. He has only given the mandate. And 65 to 70, when they wanted to start the replication process, they have to wait for 5 years to get the first funding. And so there were efforts in that. Dr. Aneja, SK, and all other people, RK Nagar, many others might have joined in the process of joining with Dr. Kurien to get the first money, converting commodity aid into money for NDDB, building corpus rather than spending it as a grant. It has all experiments in themselves. So that is one. Then they replicated in 1973. GCMF has come. Today it is the largest brand probably in the country. More brands have come in the cooperative sector. In Andhra, we have Vijaya, we have Nandini in Karnataka, we have Ovin. Every state has a milk brand and they are doing well. And Tushar would have been saying that if 10% of the production is in the hands of the cooperatives, sector behaves. That to that extent, the sector is behaving with the help of the work of Dairy Board, along with self-reliance. In 1979, there was a feeling that we are not having enough professionals joining from reputed management institutes, particularly IIM Ahmedabad. So with the help of Ravi Mathai, sir, we have able to think about starting IRMA in 1979 to service Dairy Board, service cooperatives started by Dairy Board initially, but later to service the entire development sector. So and about around the time of 80, we are able to start oil seeds work, and Clusa and SIDA were able to support again the same monetary aid, commodity aid, which is converted into money and then used. And Dairy Board serviced fruits and vegetables, tried with salt. Then in 87, there was an important event happened where Dairy Board and the financing arm of Government of India, IDC, got merged, and they became a single institution under the Parliament Act of NDDB. Under the Parliament Act, they become single entity. I remember Dr. Aneja was saying that the one regret he has is that NCDFI could not become part of that. It didn't become really communitized. So that one regret is there. Probably Dr. Kurien also might have felt that regret, but we succeeded in 87. There was another event I wanted to remind Dr. Aneja to tell us, 83 or 84, when Rao Birendra Singh made noise about us and the entire Dairy Board staff resigned. And government and government then, Indira Gandhi's government, could come to terms with the reality and reinstated Dr. Kurien. That was an important event. The power of the farmers, power of the cooperatives has been. Then we went outside India too. Dr. Kurien could take it to Soviet Union, take it to Pakistan, take it to China, take it to Sri Lanka, take it to America, take it to Africa. So that happened. And the famous movie, Sam Benegal, funded by farmers. There's another important event that tells that celebrated the in a way the Anand work. I'll not say anything more about what he has done more than that. 17 honorary doctorates, World Food Prize, and a person from Kozhikode, person from Gobichettipalayam could make such a huge difference. And Dr. Aneja saw it after Amul's established by 64, 65, when Shastriji gave the mandate and started. With the help of Michael Hals, I was told, Dr. Aneja could join Dairy Board and saw Dairy Board doing all this work from the front seat. He was the CEO of Dairy Board, he was the MD of the IDC, and he was able to see it through for 24, 25 years. I remember he got a golden bull in 90 when he took VRS from Dairy Board to join IRMA for 2 years. To work in the National Oilseed Sector Policy. I stop here, and Dr. Kurien ended his life probably working as Chancellor of Allahabad University, Central University. So he died working at the age of 91, 92. So that was the homage to the big man. Now I'll take request Dr. Aneja to take us through his reminiscences of the whole thing. Then we'll see how we progress further. We'll look at all the others who are raising voices. There will be question answers. There will be reflections by other participants in the program. Then we'll have a wrap up and vote of thanks. We plan to take about 2 hours from now. Maybe 45 minutes Dr. Aneja sir will take. Thank you very much, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very kindly. I am most honored. It's such a privilege to be talking to a group of people who are really making rural development as a mission in their lives. It's not merely making a career. It really is making a mission. And therefore, I want to congratulate all of you who are joining today and who have been working in that direction. There is so much to gain. There are mental rewards. I would imagine I stuck around the NDDB largely for the mental rewards. The nobility of the cause, as Dr. Kurien would say, quoting Nehru, that we were ordinary people and it is the nobility of the cause that rubbed on us and people thought we were great people. And I think that holds true for each one of you. That when we talk about the nobility of the cause, the higher in us comes out. And that is extremely, extremely important. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Murli. He spent, I don't know, a year or two with me and saw me in action as far as the MIO is concerned. But then what we were able to achieve as a team in MIO, I think is unparalleled in a sense that within 3 years' time, we made India self-sufficient in edible oils from massive imports to almost no imports, and a huge surge in export of oil cakes. And we handled only a small portion of the total oilseed production in India, less than 5%, and we were able to achieve this landmark. I want to start by saying that I had known Dr. Kurien as a student. He was my examiner in dairy engineering. And I first met him in 1957 when the Amul dairy was only 2 years old and I was a trainee there. And I was also the first Amul scholar. Amul gave, I think, a good scholarship to the graduates of our first batch. And so I had the privilege of seeing Amul grow right from the beginning. I also saw something, that was extremely important to me when the IIM and Michael Hals, frankly, Michael Hals joined hands with Dr. Kurien way back in 63, 64. And he did a lot of studies at the rural level, at the plant level. One of his major studies was looking at India as one farm, ECHO 1 and ECHO 2 in IIM, in looking at all the inputs that go into this one farm and all the outputs that come out of it. And I had never seen a case study like that before. And Mike really was a genius. And we attended a program in 1966, or was it 65, which the IIM organized. IIM didn't have a campus, IIM Ahmedabad. And this was organized at the Kama Hotel in Ahmedabad. And this was a 3-tier program where there were people connected with milk procurement. And I remember Narendra Bhai from Amul there. There were people connected with managing plants. And I remember Mr. Dalaya being there, and I was there. And there were many other dairy managers, including from Hindustan Liver. And then there was the 3rd tier was the policymakers. And I remember seeing a case study, which was very typical of young technical graduates get into managing these dairies and not really having been exposed to management skills. And I remember this case study where the case talks about what is the most paying product. And this was actually based on Amul. And the manager said the cheese was the most paying product. And usually they will convert, so many liters of milk gives you a kilo of cheese. This is the input cost. This is the value they can realize later on. And that case study goes on to prove that liquid milk was the most paying product. And that was an eye-opener as far as I'm concerned, and I am sure even Mr. Dalaya and Dr. Kurien, when they looked at this kind of deep analysis of managing, because he said, let's not look at merely the way you are looking at it. Make projected operating statements for the next 10 years. And the overhead would still be there, And that was an eye-opener. And I think that was also the beginning of the marriage between Amul and IIM. And Mike coming in. I was very impressed. And then Mike asked me if I will join to be on their faculty for an international dairy management program that IIM was organizing. And I joined him there. And later on, when I came to Canada to do my master's, I had finished my master's. I had done my 80 GSB, which was what you needed to join an MBA program here. And I wasn't quite sure, having learned something from Mike at that point of time, whether it's a good thing that I am pursuing my PhD here. So I wrote to Mike. I said, Mike, what would you advise me to do? You know the dairy scene in India. And Shailendra tells me that one day he asks Shailendra, is this fellow Aneja an Indian? And then he asked him as to, that we should, he told Shailendra that we should get him here. And our letters crossed. I come to India, I go to meet Mike in Ahmedabad. He's not in Ahmedabad. I come to Anand. And he then tells me how excited he was about replicating the Anand pattern. Now, I had seen the evolution of the Anand pattern. I had seen the evolution of the milk schemes all over the country and increasing dependence on milk powder. And there were these private sector dairies, and I joined, Horlicks was my first job. And we made enough profit to declare 90% dividend in the very first year of working. And then I joined Levers, and I remember W.V. Mitchell was the technical director asking me, hey, do you know what are we going to make here in this plant? And I said, skim milk powder, ghee, baby food. He says, no, only one product. And I said, what is that? And he said, you tell me. And, as a dairyman, I said, milk powder. If you want to make only one thing out of it. He says, no, you don't understand. We are here to make money. And that opened my eyes, because we had also started IRMA peas, and I want to come to that later on. These were very well dried peas, which actually caught consumer acceptance very well. These were not frozen. These were individually dried with pinholes in it, and the moisture escaped, and they would reconstitute as pretty good peas. And so I remember, when it came to giving farmers instead of 10 paisa those days for a kilo of peas, 11 paisas is what we wanted. And there would be, hell lose on that. But if Metal Box raised the price of the pouch in which these were sold from 30 paisa to 35 paisa, nobody raised an eyebrow. So you could then see, and I then realized that, I better get into something more productive, and I took up a teaching job in Bombay. So when Mike said that there is this opportunity to work here and replicate Amul, I immediately jumped on it. And so that's how I got into the dairy board. You have mentioned that we should be looking at how did the whole operation flood evolve. So when the dairy board started, was started at the instance of the Prime Minister. Lal Bahadur Shastri, who saw what was happening in Anand, he couldn't believe what he had been told. And so he thought it was still a put-up show. And he went from house to house to find out whether what he saw was actually true. And he was so excited about it that the doctor had to order him to sleep in the village. And so next day he talked to Dr. Kurien, and he raised a few issues saying, I have seen people here, they are not as sturdy as people in my village. Now for Lal Bahadur to say that was quite something, and we used to say that the smaller berths in the railways, he used to be the railway minister, were made to his size. And and he said, even the buffaloes don't look as good as the buffaloes in my village. So what is the secret of Anand? And so Dr. Kurien talked about, how the farmers all over the world market their milk jointly together. So you have a bargaining power, you can do many things with it. And he understood it all. So he wrote to all the chief ministers and the governors of the state saying that this is the way rural development should be carried out. Unfortunately, Shastriji passed away, and the letters were duly filed. Nobody was interested in this, but something else happened, and that was the Delhi Mill Scheme. So here in India, we have a cooperative doing well at Anand, which has started off with marketing milk and doing intervention in the market. And I will come to that in light of the MIO in oil. The intervention they were doing was, is too much milk in winter and too little in summer. And so all that Dr. Kurien did was bring in technology to convert the surpluses into milk powder, a conserved commodity which can be used over a year. And that really changed the whole scenario. The farmers are now getting, I would say even early stages of Amul, they were getting 90% of what they got in summer months. Earlier, the prices will go down to almost 50% in the winter months when most of the milk is produced. And in summer months, when there is hardly any milk, the prices will go up. So the major intervention was the dryer. And we could see that that dryer created its own set of problems. Nobody will buy his powder. Dr. Kurien's powder in Bombay, they would not buy it. And so Dr. Kurien had great difficulty in having the milk powder made within the country accepted by the other milk schemes. And the acceptance was not for anything else, it was the price. And Dr. Kurien will quote that he went to Bombay, met with the minister, Dinkar Rao Desai, along with Tribhuvan Das Patel, and he asked Mr. Karodi, was the milk commissioner, as to why are you not buying our powder? He said, this is too expensive. So Dr. Kurien said, are you the milk commissioner of New Zealand or the milk commissioner of Bombay State? So those days, skim milk had no value. It was really used for feeding pigs. The real value of milk was in butter. Unlike in India, where buttermilk was produced in the villages and shared with the neighbors, in the rest of the world, skim milk was really used for feeding pigs. So we had this situation, and Dr. Kurien is now able to give the farmers a good price for their milk throughout the year. In fact, later on, they never reduced the price in winter. The inflation took care of it. They would raise the price in summer, and it will continue to be the price in winter. And that is what gave the farmers the incentive to produce more. So Dr. Kurien then saw a threat. And as he said, there was so much of milk powder in the world that Europeans were actually seriously considering dumping it into sea. I'm not joking. And all that was as a result of the scare on cholesterol. Suddenly, the whole world woke up to this cholesterol and said, this is such a bad thing, and milk consumption is going down. Farmers have their own quotas to produce milk. So what do you do with this extra milk? And that was converted into milk powder and given away to destroy milk production all over the world. And so Dr. Kurien was really afraid that this nascent cooperative, plus they had already helped Mehsana build a dairy, they had helped Baroda build a dairy, Surat build a dairy, that this movement would really suffer a setback because of the threat of the cheap powder that would come in. And so I remember a meeting with Sir Richard Trehan, who was the chairman of the Milk Marketing Board of England, who was a good friend of Dr. Kurien. And he mentioned to him about these surpluses developing, and why not he get hold of these surpluses and use commodities to generate funds and also remove the threat away. Get hold of these commodities so they are not used against your farmers. In fact, he was so good at marketing this whole project to the Europeans that he told them that if you are going to be getting rid of half of your surplus and give it to me free, the other half will give you twice the price. So you really haven't lost anything. And they were so convinced they even agreed to pay for the transportation of these commodities to India. So it was sold very well. And so the commodity assistance had many other facets to it. One, we could prime the pump. We have this milk powder available to us. And when we set up new dairies, they can start off with some milk. It was making the project inflation proof. The cost will go up over a period, but so will the price of the commodities, issue price. And so it worked like a charm. And so we put up a project. It went to the Bird Food Program, and they agreed to give us these commodities. And our problems started from the day we started getting commodities, because they thought this is a ground to dump some useless commodities. And the initial batches of milk powder were green. They were infested with molds. And so when we talked about quality, remember Mr. Toomey, who was a WFP man in Delhi, saying beggars can't be choosers. And then Dr. Kurien had to tell them, hey fellows, somebody is paying good money. It is the European Union, which was EEC at that point of time, the European community, that they are paying good money for it. And you are telling me beggars can't be choosers? So we were able to overcome those things, and then they tried to reduce the standards of the commodities that would be, the sanitary standards. So there were a lot of problems starting with that. But in the meantime, Dr. Kurien is to get the dairy board going. And the dairy board got going even before Operation Flood was sanctioned. So who helped? Amul helped. And Amul asked Dr. Kurien, why should we be helping you to set up competition for us? You think about it. And he said, if we work together, we are stronger. So Amul helped, and Amul helped in many ways, apart from giving small amounts of money for setting up a campus. The real contribution came in the whole of the Amul board. The professionals were available to NDDB. I forgot to mention the setting up of the dairy board in the first place. After Shastri ji wrote, there was this major issue of the Delhi mill scheme collapsing. Like many other mill schemes, they start with good intentions. They pay the farmers the right price. They charge the consumer the right price. And then the prices go up. They can't afford to raise the prices in the cities, so they can't raise the procurement price. They start getting third-class milk and depend more and more on imported milk powder. And that milk scheme was in very bad shape. So Dr. Kurien was invited by Subramaniam to say, why don't you look at this and help us? And Dr. Kurien then said that he would bring in the best professionals that he has. And he also mentioned, apart from bringing in Mr. Dalaya, who was really managing the Amul Dairy, Mr. V.H. Shah, who was the engineering manager, Dr. I.M. Patel, who was the quality control manager. He also said that he has to bring in Michael House. Now, think of a foreigner coming in to look at the working of a government mill scheme. And Mr. Subramaniam had no problems having Michael House. And that also reminds me, since you raised some broader issues here, and you will cover later on, that Subramaniam is the real person to be given credit for the Green Revolution in India, and not the scientists. Let me quote that story because that is linked with many issues that you have raised. So Subramaniam, when he took over as the Minister of Agriculture, he called a meeting of all the policymakers, the research people, and said, we are living a ship-to-mouth existence. If a ship doesn't come in time, people starve. And it's not good for India. It's not good for our own prestige, our own self-respect. So we must, produce more and must do it quickly. So the scientists said, sir, give us 2 years and we are almost ready and we'll give you proper seeds, etc., etc., etc. He said, why not import some seeds? They said, no, with these seeds, we will get pests and we will get weeds and, there will be all kinds of stuff coming in. So it's better to wait for our seeds. So after 2 years, he called another meeting. And these scientists, who are now well known for having brought in the Green Revolution, these scientists were assembled again by Subramaniam. And he said, so are you ready with the seeds? And they said, sir, give us another 2 years and we'll be ready. And he said, and this is an important statement, he said, if this building, referring to Krishi Bhavan in Delhi, if this was bombed today, you will not have one farmer shed 2 tears for you. And he then ordered the import of, I think, 10 plane loads of the Mexican variety, the Bordeaux variety. And these fellows, objected to it. He said, look, I am bringing in thousands and thousands of tons of this wheat. Already, some of those weeds are appearing all over the country and they are known as Congress grass. You remember the grass, what is it called? It's a weed and it is a little white flower on the top like the Congress topi. And so we are bringing it all in. So what are you trying to tell me? That we are not bringing in pests and weeds along with this wheat that we are importing? Anyway, he brought in those seeds. They were given to the Punjab Agricultural University and the rest is history. So Subramaniam is now asking Dr. Kurien to look at the Delhi mill scheme, and Dr. Kurien gathers this team and he recommends to them that look at what we are doing in Anand. We are really contributing to milk production. These Johnnies have set up a structure which is corrupt, which is not really market. These are all rationing inspectors, and you cannot market, products like this. And he will, say, what is this brand? It is called Delhi Dugh Yodna Makhan. That is the brand of the butter. And so he had the chairman sacked, and the dairy was set right. And this committee, which went into looking at the Delhi mill scheme, literally became the Dairy Board of India. So when the Dairy Board was set up, he set it up, he talked to Subramaniam, and this is the way it was set up. Exactly the same committee, including the Animal Husbandry Commissioner to the Government of India. Now, he didn't want to go to the government for any money. And we actually did write to Danida. And Danida agreed to give us, I think, 14-15 lakh rupees to set up the first campus. And surely the ministry says, why do you want to approach Danida? We will give it to you. And Dr. Kurien said, and then you will ask PWD to build this building. And so Amul helped, Danida helped, and we set up the first campus. But the biggest help really came from Amul. Amul provided us their key managers to execute turnkey projects. The first one was 3 cattle feed plants that we set up in Mehsana, Surat, and Rajkot. And actually, these were built by Mr. V.H. Shah and his team. And but in the process, we had our engineers trained to do this. It also helped us bring in first set of trainees. We brought in 4 managers for each plant. Production manager, quality control manager, purchase manager, marketing manager, and these 12 managers were trained by us to run these plants. In fact, these plants were not ready in time, but the managers were ready. So we then brought in a seeding program where these managers marketed their feed made by Amul in their brand names, testing their marketing strategies, and 2 of the 3 plants became viable even before they were ready. So think of, we are handing over this plant to Surat Cooperative and to Mehsana Cooperative, and they immediately give you a check. We have given them a plant on turnkey basis with people working in it. So that was the first set. Amul also agreed that whatever equipment they will buy within the federation had not been set up, but Mehsana or Baroda, they would also give us 1% as consultation fees. So they tried to make us viable without asking for government assistance. And then we also knew we just don't have enough data to plan. And that's where Shailendra and Nagar came in, and we carried out studies. These were continuous studies in the rural milk sheds, so as to find out, work out your strategy and also see how much progress are you making. So you have baseline studies. Same thing done for the cities. So we started off with quite a bit, on the studies, on putting up plants. Also, something else happened, which was brilliant. Dr. Kurien was going to Australia, I think in 1970, for attending some dairy conference. And there he found out that all the milk commissioners will go to Australia and New Zealand sometimes in February before the budget expires in March and place their orders. And they will all jack up the prices. So Dr. Kurien talked to them and he said, I will give you an order for 10,000 tons. And so he negotiated a good price. And then he said, when the price was negotiated, he said, how much free will you give me after this? And they agreed to give us 10,000 tons free as well. So the government was so pleased, we are bringing in powder at a much lower price. And we also have free powder with which we can do many things. So the foundations of the operational flood were being sown in many directions. And so community assistance really helped us. We then the initial years were really of planning. We carried out studies. We also looked at technology. We looked at technology because nobody had really reviewed the technology that we were using all over the country. And I remember this meeting started by Dr. Kurien saying, hey, why are we pasteurizing milk and bottling it? All that my wife does is remove the cap, throw it away, put this bottle of milk into a patili and boil it. So everything that we have done has been undone. So why don't we look at technologies? So that's how the concept of bulk vending came in. That let consumers bring in their own dabbas and slot machine will give them their milk. And the mother dairy came in, etc. And one of the early problems was this mother dairy would not be sanctioned. And there was one Mr. Haksar. Now, that is in Shiv Kumar's field. His brother was the chairman of ITC later on. This one was Ajit Haksar and the other one was, who was the chairman of ITC?
Ajit Haksar was the chairman of ITC.
So the other Haksar, what would that be? I think it was P.N. Haksar?
P.N. Haksar.
Yeah, he was a very important man. So one day Dr. Kurien runs into Haksar and Haksar says, hey, what is this? Your plan is, I see all the data, there is nothing being spent, nothing is being done. What is going on? So Dr. Kurien says, because of you. So what do you mean because of me? He said, I have put up this proposal to build a dairy in Delhi called the Mother Dairy, and the Planning Commission has been sitting on it for the last 6 months. So he, Haksar was very upset. He was a man of action. And so he said, he organized a meeting the next day. And I remember going to this meeting and we are all prepared with all the papers. So Haksar calls the Joint Secretary that time, who was P.S. Kohli, later on the Chief Secretary of Bihar. So he calls Kohli and he says, what is the issue, Mr. Kohli? Kohli says, sir, we have questions. Now, Dr. Kurien couldn't take it. So he said, Mr. Kohli, you have questions? I probably have the answers. Is there anything that stopped you raising these questions for the last 6 months? We have a postal system in this country. You can send me a letter. You can call me. Is there, are you the joint secretary here or the disjointed secretary? We made an enemy for life. But the fact is, he then came out with his questions. And the first question was, we are using stainless steel for the bulk vending booths in Delhi. And so Dr. Kurien said, in the first place, did you object to stainless steel being used in the loos in the railways? The lavatories in the railways are all stainless steel. And you're objecting to stainless steel being used for milk tanks, stainless steel was a very rare commodity those days, was very expensive. In fact, one of the things that we had in the beginning was somebody donate us stainless steel. And so then Dr. Kurien tells me the fact is that we have stopped using stainless steel in these tanks. We use FRP tanks. Anyway, then Haksar says, Dr. Kurien, please stay here for a day. I'll get this cleared by tomorrow. And he says, no, I can't stay. Why not? He says, because I have not brought my pajamas. So, we had fun as well. So I'm just saying that there is, and that delayed the whole project. And later on, everybody will tell us that, that we are behind schedule. The fact is the project did not have any goals on milk production. Later on, people will tell us you will not have enough feed and fodder to produce this milk. We are only talking about capturing a commanding share of the 4 markets of Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, Madras. That was the objective. So one looks at the other way of planning was we couldn't ask for commodities for more than 5 years. Nobody can commit. So initially it was plan was for 5 years. It took us 7, 8, 9 years to complete that and move on to the second one. But the fact is, there were inherent limitations. So we had the dairies set up. We are now generating money. We are now able to, one of the major things we did was to send spearhead teams to organize cooperatives. You remember Dr. Chaitani and his group, and they would go out to the rural areas, and they had standard operating procedures, carry out surveys, find out which milk route should they start. And they were equipped with manuals for the society, the accounting manual, the operational manual, and the whole works. And that worked like a charm. And when I come to think of it now with hindsight, Dr. Kurien really was the spearhead team for this whole mission. He was heading this spearhead team, which I was a part of, carrying out this larger project. So we had fairly good success, and then comes in all the criticism. And one of the things Dr. Kurien would say is, next birth he wants to be an economist. Sit back and criticize and do nothing. And so we have a whole lot of economists who will tell us we are making India dependent on milk powder. In fact, the Europeans were also thinking we'll become dependent. That's why they gave it to us to start with, not realizing this is a totally different project. We are not going to allow these commodities to be used against our farmers. The other criticism was that we will not have enough feed and fodder. And I must say, Mike had a vision. Mike knew all these issues will come up, and he was basically, a theoretician, and a good one at that. And we had started working on a project, what we call the conversion efficiency in milk. So you would normally hear that Indian cows give you a liter, the foreign cows those days will give you 10 liters, so our efficiency is 1/10. But in terms of calories going in and calories popping out, we found out that the efficiency of the animals out there was about 30%, and the efficiency of our cows was about 10%. Buffaloes was about 15%. And if we were to increase the efficiency through breeding, etc., we could double the efficiency without growing another blade of grass. So we did a study, and I remember this model was 75-85 model, which said that we will be able to produce 50 million tons of milk. We are producing 20 million at that time, without growing another blade of grass by greater efficiencies. And Mike really got his doctorate on this. And this worked like a charm. But later on, there were people already saying that this will not work. I think what I am going to do is, I have taken a lot of time. May I start taking questions and then complete some of the brief that you have given me?
Sure, sir, but you may like to just quickly say 2-3 points about what do you suggest for current day agriculture? What do you think are your lessons from this?
I'm very glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Two things come to my mind. One is poverty in India had nothing to do with Indians. We just stuck to agriculture. So in 1920, when Ford came out with his car, a car was $1,000. Actually, it was $3,000. He then realized that his workers cannot afford this car. So when he started mass production, he reduced it to $1,000 a car, so that everybody can afford to have one. The price of wheat at that point of time varied between $100 to $200 a ton. Even today, the price of wheat is $200-300 a ton, and the car is $30,000. So the terms of trade went against agriculture. Any country that got stuck with agriculture became poor. So one of the major problems we have is that we depended so much on agriculture. And I was happy to see some policymakers now saying agriculture cannot absorb all these people. But we still have the responsibility to do more out of agriculture. So when we say that we can double farmers' income, that is totally doable. Now let's look at why did these prices stay at this level? The fact is the available technology in agriculture can produce, if fully used all over the world, 20 times, it can feed 20 times the population of world. Now, if just think about it, so why do the prices not go up? Because more and more technology gets used. And the supply side is really not a constraint. The demand goes up, but the supply meets the demand and the prices don't go up. So one of our major problems is that. And then when we look at our agriculture, you know, milk today is about a third of our agriculture GDP. Fruits and vegetables is another 1/3. And the rest of the agriculture, which uses 90% of our land and 90% of our water, produces 1/3 of our agricultural GDP. We obviously have to move on to higher value agriculture. And nothing better than fruits and vegetables, you know, and the potential there is much higher. But there, the real problem is we still haven't brought in the technology. So to make market interventions, you know, you will have the onion prices go up and go down and tomato prices go up and go down. We have really not brought in any system which will buy 5 to 10% of the total production in the country and convert it into commodities. You know, I'm looking at tomato paste, for example. There's such a huge opportunity out there. And there are frozen vegetables, etc., etc. The fact is our fruits and vegetable farmers still get only about less than 1/3 of what the consumer pays. And in milk, we are able to pay 2/3, which is the most perishable commodity. So that's one set of opportunities that we have out here. The other is we really are wastefully using our water. I mean, for Punjab to produce rice is totally illogical. That is a sandy soil. It should really have been producing more of maize. That's what people consumed at that point of time, and other stuff which will give you more returns per acre, per unit of water. And, you know, but unfortunately, the political system is such that even in Mandya, which is not meant for really producing sugar, because you have a dam there, you have to produce sugar. And then you don't allow the rest of the water to go out. So the water is really, the water utilization is, and its pricing is a major, major issue out there. That's one set. The other is, if you look at the market intervention in oilseeds, you know, we really haven't kept on the pace that was built. You think of India importing 1,000 crores or 1,500 crores worth of oil in the mid 80s, and that was next to petroleum products. And that's why the Prime Minister said, you know, why can't we produce this? And we said, yes, we can produce it. And then we talked about our project, and then he asked as to what will you do? And so we talked about the basics of market intervention, where you ensure that the farmer has a good price when he harvests. So there is a price when he sows the seed, and that price shouldn't go too much lower than the price at the time of the harvest. And then the farmer will produce everything. And that all that we had to do was pick up 5% of this oil seeds, and we can operate within a 20% price band. And then his next, why do you think you can do it in 5 years? You took 25 in milk. So we talked about saying that the first 20 years in milk, we were fighting with the government. So if you give us the policy and whatever we need, then we can do it in 5 years. And the fact is we were able to do it. But look at what has happened now. We are back to importing large quantities, and we just, you know, at the policy level, nobody cares for the farmers. So that's one set of issues. You had also mentioned, and I like to briefly touch on that, resignations. You know, the fact is, we were already making a progress. We had a good handle on the dairy sector. that things were falling in place, that our milk powder production was going up dramatically, our milk powder consumption was going down significantly, that the cooperatives are doing well. When all that is on the upswing, we have a whole lot of articles written against us. And one of the roots of those articles was this institute in The Hague, Institute of Development Studies in Holland. And there are so many fellows got onto it. And some of them were really promoted by people who oppose the project. And so you remember the white lie article, which was, which they won't even refute. They won't publish what we are trying to tell them. And we had to take them to the press council, and Pritish Nandi had to apologize. The fact is, at that point of time, the minister was quite happy. He didn't like our taking the decisions that we are taking. He thinks everything should be done with his blessings, and they have their own agenda. And so when a question was asked based on this article, the minister replied that they will inquire into the working of the dairy board. And I must say, it was absolutely insulting that here is a bunch of people totally devoted to this work, working for the nation, and they are now being made out as the enemies of the nation. We're going to be making India dependent, etc., etc., etc. And so I called a meeting of the heads of the divisions, and I said, fellows, I'm not going to stay here. This country will not get my bones. That this is not the way to handle professionals. And so I said, I am resigning anyway. And you could see in that meeting, everybody felt the same way, and everybody in that room resigned at that moment. And by next day, all the professionals in the dairy board had resigned. Dr. Kurien was not even in town. So when he comes back, he was angry with me, saying, fellows, the minister will think I put this up. This is the drama. I said, what nonsense? This dairy board belongs to us as much as it's yours. The term was, tumhare baap ka nahi hai, mere baap ka bhi hai. And so he was pretty upset with that. And next day we were in Delhi, and he said he had another set of people trying to tell me that don't push this. And I would not yield. So finally he said, why don't you meet B.G. Varghese? B.G. Varghese was a good friend of Dr. Kurien. He had written the first article on Amul Dairy way back in 1955. And he was the chief editor of Indian Express. So I went to meet him. When he heard about the story, he said, I don't believe you. Show me the letters, including this letter which says the country will not get my bones. And so he saw that, and he said, this is the most unique thing that has happened since Gandhi. He hasn't heard of a thing like this. This is a big story. Don't tell anybody. Just keep quiet. I said, why should I keep quiet? He said, because you're going to publish this. And he said, when? He said he will do it on a day when India has not exploded another nuclear bomb or any such major thing. And then he calls me one day and he says, look at the papers tomorrow morning. And surely the headline is, 700 scientists of the dairy board resign. I think the Chennai edition said, and it will be topless. And so the local editors can do what they want to do with the headline, but 5-column front page. And Mrs. Gandhi was inaugurating, I think, a science congress in Delhi. It was biochemists or something. And after the conference, the press pointed out this article, and she got mad. She called Alexander and said, what is this going on? And so Kohli, don't forget Kohli of the disjointed secretary. By now, he is the additional secretary of the minister gunning for Dr. Kurien. And so he's called in. The prime minister dictates a note, and the minister has to put this in the parliament with a bleeding heart, saying that the objective of looking at the functioning of the dairy was to strengthen it because we are so impressed with what they are doing in this field and that field, etc., etc. And the Jha committee was set up. Yes, Murali, you want to?
I have
raise
a, yeah, that is very nice, sir. I have a question which is related to agriculture. Milk is a perishable commodity. Every day, farmer comes to cooperative, and the whole pattern is like that. Therefore, every time we talk about single commodity cooperative, and it worked. When you come to agriculture, and there are perishable, non-perishable, multiple commodities happening, and they're happening throughout the year. But farmer may not come to the cooperative every day. Given this situation, what is the way forward for institutional structure for the farmers?
Let me explain to you something that I saw quite some time ago in Kenya. There is a Patel family which was sending those days a whole plane full of fruits and vegetables to London every evening. Now, they had organized a system. They had organized a system that they provided the seeds, they provided a guaranteed market, and when the crop is ready, they would send empty boxes in a van, and these boxes will be dropped at various villages, and the fellow will stop at the last village for a while, and they will pack these, whether if it is bhindi or giloda or whatever is the Gujarati vegetable, graded at the village level, packed into those boxes, and brought straight to the airport and shipped. Next day morning, it is in the London market. Right. And if anything got rejected, the farmer didn't get paid. So the farmer took responsibility. And they were sending a whole plane load. And then I believe they started doing the same thing with the roses. And now they send a whole 747 all the way to New York. Now, I know Unilever, some time ago, Unilever France, not Unilever India, was buying gherkins around Bangalore on more or less a similar model. You know, and these days it's extremely important to know from where does the product come from quality angle. So you can identify the source. I think the tragedy of the dairy board was really the fruit and vegetable project not succeeding. If we had not used the word shuffle, maybe we would have succeeded. You know, the fact is, one day Tikku asked me, what do I do with all these pea pods that come to Delhi? I said, why do you bring the empty pods here? You know, that would make excellent fodder in the villages. Then I went to see the horticulture mission, and the whole thing was Raw Bender Singh's revenge on us. And he set it up in Gurgaon. I went and saw this horticulture mission people. They'll go to every village with a dozen seeds. You know, you cannot manage even one product at a time. You know, that's difficult. So why don't you have a route for bhindi and a route for bangan and a route for something else, you know, and concentrate on that. Treat them as single commodities, because every fruit and vegetable needs to be handled differently. And in terms of conservation, you know, they all need different treatments. And so therefore, one should really be looking at one particular fruit and a particular vegetable at a time, at least on a route. And that's what these people had done in Kenya. So that is an area, I mean, I feel sad. Tomatoes here in Canada are something like $3 a kilo. So we're discussing 200 rupees a kilo. And tomato ketchup here is 1/3 the price of tomato ketchup in India. I mean, does it make any sense? I mean, I remember when I was a student here in Canada, milk here was 3 times more expensive, but the ice cream here was 1/3 the price of ice cream in India. So when we had plenty of milk, we started with the ice cream, the Sugam ice cream. We said, we will bring down the price of ice cream to 1/3. So what was a 3 rupees a cup was brought down to, what was a 6 rupees a cup was sold for 2 rupees. And the consumers thought this ice cream is not here to stay. There were mile-long queues. And we had to fly in a freezer every 6 weeks. And then it became a profitable business. So ice cream became a normal item of food, not luxury. So, the problem with the Indian food processing is people handle on an average a ton or 2 tons a day, and they all want to become millionaires on that. And in case of milk, we refuse to set up anything which was less than 100 tons a day. It will not become viable. So if you set up, tomato is a classical case to me. I feel so sad. I had some colleague from Puttaparthi who will take me to Mudnahalli. Trucks of
Madanapalli.
tomatoes come into
Madanapalli.
Mudnahalli.
Yeah, Madanapalli.
Madanapalli.
Yeah.
Sorry, not Mudnahalli, Madanapalli. And there are trucks and trucks, and they would be thrown away on the roadside during the fresh season. So you think about it. I mean, I feel sad. I was asked to look at apple processing in Himachal. Once I was there, the minister asked me to look at it. And I couldn't believe they put up the apple processing in the hottest part of Himachal Pradesh. Mandi. Made no sense. When you can use the river water in Kullu and Manali to run a cold store, you don't need refrigeration. Here you have the hottest area. And so, there is so little that has gone, so little of imagination that has gone into fruits and vegetables. And now there is a great opportunity. Frozen foods have become the technology for this. And so many of these things can be frozen. But there again, look at, I like what Sodhi says, that his objective is to charge the consumer the minimum, pay the farmer the maximum, so that when they produce more and more and more of it, they can still sell it. There are no incentives to produce more and more of onions and potatoes and tomatoes in India, because the moment they produce more, you have to go and throw it away. Does that answer to some extent?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. But the institutional structure, I'm still not clear, but we'll wait, sir. Any questions from the participants? Pushti Sab is, sir. Pushti Sab is here. I would like to see whether he wants to say something. NM Pushti.
I'm so happy to see him. I don't see him. I see his name.
Yeah.
I don't know, my video is not getting opened. Thank you, sir. I was not sure whether I'll be able to join this, but it was wonderful. And I am hearing a lot of interest, all that you are saying. A lot of things are vibrating in my mind. And how things are getting done. I'm a late entry to the movement that you inspired in Anand, but every bit of your contribution and contribution of all the colleagues in NDDB and Dr. Kurien are very, very impactful in my development sector journey. And all that you have said, that it is becoming much more relevant today. What we did several years ago, 2.5, 3 decades, 4 decades ago in Anand, probably it was ahead of time, and today it's much more important, much more relevant. Market intervention is very relevant right now. I think the government policy on the new technology mission on edible oil form, it's not really addressing the issues around edible oil, and it's so unfortunate when it was announced. I was very excited, and I wrote a communication to the PMO congratulating them and all that. Then I got a reply that we'll be in touch. But later on, when I saw what it is, all the framework, I got thoroughly disappointed, and I said I thought that probably it is better that I don't get into this kind of strategy and all that. But it's unfortunate. The fruits and vegetables are what you said, and today the air connectivity is so good and the vegetable production is so widespread. Farmer producer companies, farmer producer groups, which was drawn in the drawing board of dairy board, and today I think those institutional structures are emerging, and probably it is time that we use the concepts, the technology, management processes was demonstrated by dairy board. I think it should be done in the country in a scale that will show much greater result. But how will get that happen? How you can people like you, sir, can make that impactful contribution that's we're thinking, we're discussing and all that, but how it can happen, I have no clue. I think this is a good forum. There are thought leaders and Shiv Kumar like persons are also here. So I'm sure they being in the forefront of the advisory input from the corporate sector to the policy making, I'm sure they will be able to put those ideas across to the policymakers appropriately. Thank you, sir. I have no questions as such, but I have some reflections I already posted in my chat box, if it makes sense. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Can I add one more thought on this?
Sure.
You see, when we looked at milk, and particularly conversion efficiency studies, we looked at milk globally. We said we would turn out to be the cheapest producer of milk in the world. And not our wildest dreams, we thought we'll reach this 200 million ton mark, you know. And no major interventions have been made except the fact that today 20% of India's milk is actually handled by the organized sector. 10% by cooperatives, 10% by the private sector. But the fact is the farmers will not be let down now. So, and the other is we should really be looking at fruits and vegetables globally. You know, we should become the fruit and vegetable producers of the world.
That's right, sir.
And, you know, we are the poor of the world, and anything that is labor intensive, and fruits and vegetables is very labor intensive. Particularly if you don't want to use weedicides and pesticides, etc., you know, you have to look at every fruit and vegetable every day kind of a thing before you harvest it. So it's far more labor intensive. And we have to bring in conservation. You know, I still cannot get over the fact that tomato ketchup is more expensive in India. Now, the fact is, you know, Nestle and Horlicks and Levers, they were all looking at how much money can they make. They were not looking at how much more productivity they can increase, how much more jobs they can create in the rural areas. So you think about, you know, it was a totally different way of thinking. You know, that the sky is the limit. You farmers, you produce, it is our job to sell. So the whole concept of IRMA came in because we need managers who are committed to work for the farmers, who would ensure, who don't have to go back to the farmers, sir, I don't have capacity. Hey, what were you doing so far? Why didn't you come to us earlier and say, I need this capacity now? Why are you telling us when you don't have capacity? So respond to the farmers' requirements. So I think we really have to look at fruits and vegetables globally.
Okay, sir.
Sir, I have a question, very short question, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, NDDB thought to use the experiences around the milk to other countries, and very appropriately it started with edible oil. But some years later, when there was a discussion in the government of India at the Ministry of Agriculture level, one of the then secretaries who shared it with me, so it is a fact. He asked that why dairy board, having done so well in milk and trying to do in oil, suddenly abandoned oil. And the response to that to the then secretary from the highest office of dairy board was that we did a mistake. Probably it was not our core competency. We should have continued to stay in milk. We should not have ventured into edible oil. So
I think that was wrong.
so that was
I can talk frankly. The fact is, the dairy board had never lost any money on any project. We saw to the viability of everything that we are doing before we get into it.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we started marketing Dhara at the same price as wholesale price of mustard oil. I mean, it made no sense at all. We're spending 10, at that point of time, 10 rupees more on packaging. And so instead of selling at 35 rupees, you're selling it. So we ran into huge losses. Dhara was not a part of the MIO. MIO was open market intervention in wholesale prices. And so I remember when I left, we had made some 60 crores in Dhara. The government was quite clear that we cannot lose money. We're buying at 20 and selling it at 25. How can we lose money? And so we said, no, we will not lose money. And at the end of the first year, we had 60 crores profit. And the deal with the government was, we will keep 30 crores for infrastructure and the other 30 crores will revert to the government. But then what happened is that we loaded MIO with Dhara losses and the government refused to accept it. And those losses ran into 200-300 crore rupees. Yeah. So the fact is, putting Dhara as a part of MIO as not as an independent thing was a mistake. And that, that impacted on the credibility of the dairy board. You understand that? Am I getting it across?
Yes, sir.
No, Prusty sir is aware of that.
Sir, yeah, but abandoning the sector was a grave mistake by the dairy board.
Yeah.
No, not at all. You please don't forget, why did we get into edible oil? Let me explain to you. Mr. Bahubhai Jasbhai Patel was the chairman of Amul Dairy. He was also the chief minister of Gujarat. And he one day said, hey, look at this. The price of oil has come so close to the price of milk. Would you believe that today? It is true. Look at the data on 77, 78. There were days when oil was 5 rupees a kilo and milk was 4 rupees a kilo. I couldn't believe it. So he said, why don't we do something about it? This is also the time that there was a report that we can get into edible oil through commodities. Government had some allocation, which the government didn't know, some allocation out of a sugar quota that US had provided, and we were to cash on that. All the sugar producing countries were given a quota because America was producing sugar at very high prices. So they agreed to compensate the other countries. And there was some pool of money sitting there. And so we were told by the Cooperative League that there is this money sitting there. If you have a letter from the government that, use that quota to give us the oil, they would give it. All this happened when we know that oil prices are really down. But what was the motivating force? Bulk of the out-of-pocket expenditure on milk production has always been oil cakes. And the price of oil cake depends on the price of oil seeds. And the price of ghee and the price of edible oil always moved in tandem. There is a ratio. So if the oil prices really crashes dramatically, the ghee price will also crash. So we realized there were very strong links between the two sectors. So think about it. We were also the largest buyers of oil cake as far as the cattle feed plants are concerned. And so that there were good relationships between the two sectors. And the fact that we demonstrated that we could become viable by just giving the farmer a reasonable price. Is that too much to ask in India?
In fact, sir, the oil cake greed was coming up, and then the supply chain system of oil cakes was taking a shape that would have improved the whole feed economics, the cattle feed economics. But unfortunately, everything collapsed.
And we had set up the whole infrastructure. In fact, we were even, I don't know whether Murli is, we even talked about buying a ship.
Yes.
We said, 50,000 tons of oil to be moved from Kandla to Calcutta through trucks.
Yeah.
And they wanted 2 rupees a kilo and blocked the whole artery. And so we had set up the infrastructure. And when we started off, STC went and hired every single tank in the country. We couldn't hire one tank anywhere. And so we had to go to the cabinet secretary and say, look at, what is the government doing? You tell us to make India self-sufficient, and this is what you are doing. And promptly we got all the tanks we wanted. Then we said, don't issue this to Vanaspati industry because they get it at lower prices. Why should they? And it went to an extent where Dr. Kurien had to tell the Prime Minister that in the Singapore market, they're talking about, oil being traded, STC buying every Thursday or every Friday at this time, and the prices go up. And that yesterday's trade, they gave some 30 crore rupees to Amitabh Bachchan to be given to you. So he couldn't take it. He said, "Thoda baithiye." And I said, Sukhramji is coming, the minister. So he asked Dr. Kurien, बताइए इनको बताइए क्या बात कर रहे हैं सिंगापुर में. तो उसको बताया कि साहब ये बात कर रहे हैं वो. तो he told Sukhram ji, आप ये हैंडल नहीं कर सकते हैं, आप ये कल से डेयरी बोर्ड को दे दीजिए. So, you need support at that level. Now, what I am saying is, if the farmers were properly organized, they would then demand this support. If they had professional managers working for them, they will tell you what is it that we need in terms of policy. And that is why the IRMA was set up.
Correct. I just see Gauri is there. Gauri has worked in Oilseeds Cooperative. So I will just ask Gauri to see what she wants to say. Gauri. Are you able to unmute Gauri? Okay, she's not able to. Any other? I have a. We have others. We have one question, sir. You are raised in your thoughts also earlier that women are important, and dairy board's milk work is supporting women. And increasingly in the country, we recognize that farming is done by women, men are supporting women. So that's the broad position we are taken. So how do you react to this? How do you ensure that the women are in the lead, in the governance, in the control of the things, in the control of the value chains?
Well, I think in the first place, my own initiation into the women power was dramatic. I lived in a village where my wife was the doctor in charge of the primary health center. And there was a lady, our neighbor, she would come and tell my wife that, this maid you have is really not looking after your daughter. And so you better kadi nako sahib. Then my wife said, well, how will I manage? She said, leave your daughter with us and we will look after her. We have a large family, she will be looked after. So she would leave our daughter there. Then one day, my wife has gone to work. I am to go to work, and this lady has not come to pick up our daughter. So I go to the house, and I see this is a large family, 5 sons, 4 daughters. They're all sitting across as if somebody has died in the family. You can see it in long faces. So I asked the eldest son. I said, what happened? And he said, quietly I asked him, and he quietly tells me the buffalo died. To me, I was honestly, I would have probably brushed it aside and say, what a big thing, But I kept control and I said, you better find out what's going on. So I asked the man, Gordon Bhai, I said, Gordon Bhai, why don't you go and get another buffalo? He says, paisa nathi. I don't have money for it. And then you should see this lady, she's Shantaben. She says, Bhais mate paisa nathi. There is no money for the buffalo. Daru pina mate, daru mate che. It's a dry area. He's not supposed to be drinking. And so, daru ke liye paisa hai? No, I'll tell you why he doesn't want to buy a buffalo. Because he wants me to extend my hand every day and ask for money. Today I manage the entire family with the milk money. You think of it. And she said, there will be no food cooked until another buffalo is brought in. I then realized in presence of all the children, in the presence of a stranger like me, she is openly talking about the husband drinking. He keeps all the crop money and she manages the family with the milk money. Now, one of the secrets to milk is that the money really goes to the housewives in the villages. And I think that is a very, very important part. And that's because it was considered chicken feed. It was considered so small. Today it's 1/3. I don't know the situation today, but I'm sure the women didn't give up. I look at the competitiveness of India and milk as animal handed down, crop residue based feeding system, and family labor. That is what made India very competitive. And you would find if you go into value-added commodities, high-value commodities like fruits and vegetables, the same thing will happen. The crop residues, the leaves of the cauliflower will go into the feeding system. The pea pods will go into the feeding system. And then they will find out their own ways and means of working out a cropping pattern which takes care of the feeding system. So the animals were plugged into the Indian farming system because land was limited and the families are growing. So it optimized on India's farming system, including the most productive use of family labor and skills. One of the problems we have in India is we don't look at farming as skills. You have to only go out to Kenya and Jamaica to find out, that a fresh graduate in agriculture can walk into a farm and start advising them. Let a graduate in India do that. So we don't even look at farming skills with us as a national asset.
We have colleagues. Krishna, can you raise your question? Yeah. Krishna Gopal.
Yeah, thanks, Murli. Thank you very much, Dr. Aneja. We really thankful to you because I think it's 6 a.m. in the morning at Canada and you're enthusiastically explaining us all the processes that you have gone through all these years, right? So we really thank you for this opportunity. I have a very simple question. Dr. Kurien always chose to be with government in many ways because, National Dairy Development Board is something which government has created. And during the Operation Flood, he also set up dairies with the state governments. And I think many of the state dairy cooperatives were set up with the help of the state governments. In fact, in some places, I also read that state government were the project management agency, which was trying to create and build this one, and that delayed the entire process before NDDB took over this one. So state governments were actively involved in management of governing and developing these dairy cooperatives. So on one side, Dr. Kurien used to vehemently oppose government. On the other side, I think very carefully and intelligently played with them and tried to use them in making this large-scale movement. So when you look at agriculture, what Murli was asking, so what is your advice that in future, how do we actually, what should be the balance? And also if you can say 2-3 narratives or incidents on how you manage the government during this entire process. How do you actually keep them away, yet use their resources and all those things? How did you actually do it? So if you can just tell 2-3 critical incidents, it will be good.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked. The fact is, in the evolution of the dairy board, we were trying to find our own feet. So when the state government said they will set up corporations, we thought at least it's better than dealing directly with the government, not realizing that it's no good anyway. But as we went along, we realized it. I will quote two cases. One is there were enough people within the Ministry of Agriculture sabotaging the project. There was a joint secretary who took it upon himself to see that Dr. Kurien should not be the chairman of both IDC, NDDB, etc. And in other words, cut his feet. Now, this joint secretary then went to the states and said, hey, you put up your projects, I will send them to the World Bank. So he managed to have projects come to him from Rajasthan, Karnataka, and Madhya Pradesh. World Bank saw these and said, this is bullshit. They are not going to fund these because there were standard government programs for dairy development. And I'll come to that in a minute. So if they are willing to fund it, they are willing to fund it if they put up projects based on the Anand pattern. So all those projects came to us. Now, so we looked at now a state. Earlier, we were talking about individual milk sheds. So I remember Karnataka. So we made a plan for Karnataka. What are the best districts in Karnataka? What are the best markets? And how can we develop these? So a plan was made. Karnataka government agreed to it. And then I remember going to Mr. G.V.K. Rao along with the World Bank team. The World Bank team asked us to go along with them and look at these projects. And I realized the World Bank is going to fund it. So, but is the state ready? So I talked to Mr. G.V.K. Rao, the development commissioner at that time. I said, Mr. G.V.K. Rao, they will agree, but are you ready? He said, what do you mean I am ready? I said, look, you will need for each district a spearhead team from the dairy board and a shadow team from your side. So people who will organize cooperatives and will become employees of the cooperative later on. People from our side who will help them build these cooperatives and put up the plants and give it to you in turnkey basis. He said, I understand that. So I said, you should really be asking the dairy board for this. So he said, hey, hang on. He called his secretary, dear Dr. Kurien, and he said, now write the letter. So I dictated the letter. I come back, Dr. Kurien sends it to me, and I send a reply agreeing to everything. So what happened was we set up cooperatives from day one. We realized that this was and that system evolved, and Karnataka cooperatives are one of the best today. I'm just mentioning. But look at another side. We had Sheshan in Tamil Nadu as Secretary of Agriculture, T.N. Sheshan. And he tells us, so made a state plan. And he looks at this plan and he sends a message to us saying this is bullshit. So I and Nagar went there and we asked him as to what his problem is. So he said that, we have said the milk production, I don't remember the exact figures, but something like your daily production is 40 lakh liters a day, and after another program will produce it 60 lakh liters a day, and this is how much we'll collect, etc. So he said, all this data is bullshit. I said, okay, you want me to look at this data? He said, yes. I said, can we meet tomorrow? I realized this is a bull. You can't handle him offhanded. You have to prepare yourself. So I went and talked to the team and we looked at the data all over again. I had seen that plan before it came to him. Now we had data saying that milk production in Tamil Nadu varied anywhere from 40 lakh liters to 80 lakh liters. This is the data supplied by the state government. Fellows who don't want Operation Flood, they'll give you all kinds of muck. So next day we go to this meeting and I said, Mr. Seshan, you said this is the problem. But the fact is I have data which says 40 lakhs. I also have data which says 80 lakhs. Now, if you believe your data, then you have actually exceeded the targets that we set up. We were only talking about 60 lakh liters. You are already producing 80 lakh liters. Thank you, Mr. Seshan. You don't need Operation Flood. You have achieved your targets. No, he couldn't believe what's going on. And I remember I met him years later after he retired as the election commissioner. And I went and called on him. And I said, you remember our first meeting? He said, how can I forget? He made pulp out of these guys who had provided us this data. But at the meeting, he said, all right, we'll accept your plan, but how are you going to monitor it? I said, look at the plan. It says there will be baseline studies carried out. There will be annual surveys in the rural areas. We will know precisely what is happening. And then we will set targets. So he had some questions. He raised them. He said, what do you want me to do? We said, along with this plan, there is an order that we want you to issue, which says only cooperatives will work, that you will do this and you will do that. Then and there, he issued that order. You then know what happened in Erode, for example. It's a classical success story. I don't know what's happening now. But, you have to win over these. It is Sheshan again who came in handy as far as the MIO is concerned. When I didn't have tanks, I went to him as a cabinet secretary. You think of the kind of support you had. Does that answer a part of the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It
Session became a
answers
good
it.
friend after that.
Yeah.
Good
Oh,
friend.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So how do you actually keep people away? Some people away, and how do you actually befriend some people? That's the whole game. That's what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. Correct.
What I was saying was, when you find somebody who is sympathetic,
Yeah.
who really understands. I mean, there was a joint secretary by the name Raj Gopal. He couldn't take what the minister was doing to us. He actually quit the IAS. He was so disgusted. But he was so committed. And so you have to find I remember somebody telling us that if the cows in India were asked as to what is it that they would need a better breed of dairymen.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you. Madhumurthy, yeah, please.
Yeah. Hello, sir. I am Madhumurthy from APMAS based in Hyderabad. As you might be aware, in the recent months, so there are some important developments in the country. One is the Supreme Court of India has ruled that cooperatives, farming cooperatives is a fundamental right. And recently there is a new ministry for cooperation that is being formed. So earlier it was under Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Now it is a new ministry. And during last 10 years, number of farmer producer organizations, FPOs, about 10,000 FPOs are formed. And now Government of India has come up with another scheme of forming 10,000 more FPOs in the next couple of years. So in this background, so basically, what do you see the kind of constraints that cooperatives faced some decades back in the country, the kind of different constraints, bureaucratic, political, the interference and all that. The FPOs are also going to face in this kind of scenario. What do you foresee, sir, in case of farmer producer organizations in the country?
That's a tough question. It's a tough question in a sense. The way we were raised with it, it was a blessing working with Dr. Kurien and his thoughts on this whole thing. And he would go back to two things I want to talk about. One is he would go back to how the cooperative laws were formed. They were formed in 18 whatever year was by the white man, primarily for money cooperatives and many other things. And he thought it fit that these natives cannot manage this cooperative. So a white man had to be the registrar. And after the white man left, the brown man became the registrar. And so he was God and is God. And the minister of the God is even superior. So that is the way the cooperatives. And I know we talked about producer cooperatives at that point of time. And at one point of time, Dr. Kurien went to Mrs. Gandhi and said that please change these laws so that the cooperatives work like companies. his simple request was they should just be registered like a registrar of cooperative companies. And you should fulfill all your requirements of providing them whatever data you need. They don't interfere in the working of the company unless you do something, some monkey business. Okay. And so he wanted that change, and Mrs. Gandhi then said that, you think our farmers can manage this. And Dr. Kurien told her, you are now talking like the British government. We will give you freedom when you are ready. So he said that we means India decided that having our own government was more important than having a more efficient government. So if you are talking about good government, bring Lord Mountbatten back. These are the words. So what I am trying to say is, good governance is good governance. You don't need a ministry for cooperatives. Is there a ministry only for companies? Just think about it. If you give freedom to the companies that they should follow certain rules and regulations, make certain declarations timely, and follow certain rules, nobody really interferes with you. But the problem with the cooperative is the registrar of the cooperative decides which cooperative is to be audited. Whether it's doing well or not doing well is apart, because his lord and master tells him what to do. So while cooperatives are supposed to be underpinning the democracy at the grassroots level, good governance has to be everywhere. What else can I say? Mrs. Gandhi didn't agree to that change. And then she calls Dr. Kurien and says, Dr. Kurien, I am a farmer. Not for him, it was the news. And he says, ma'am, I didn't know that. And she says, I produce cauliflowers, in the Maroli area or wherever that is. And when my servant takes it to sell, he gets it 2 rupees a cauliflower. When another servant goes to buy, he pays 10 rupees for a cauliflower. Who takes away these 8 rupees and for what? So Dr. Kurien said, this is the curse of India. And you are asking me now. And then the story goes like this, that Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated. Alexander called Dr. Kurien and said that Mrs. Gandhi told me that you will get into fruits and vegetables. She says, no, I never committed anything. It's a dead person's word against you. So that's how we got into fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We're running out of time, but we'll just spend some time listening to Shiv. Shiv is a second batch IRMA, one of the eminent IRMAns we have. He served on the IRMA board. He initially spent 6 years with the GrowFed, Oilseeds Growers Federation. Then the remaining 32 years he is with ITC, currently heads the Agri and IT businesses of ICT. He also looks at social investments. His e-Chowpal initiative is very famous. It was a case study at Harvard. Right now, he is in the man at the helm of agriculture in some sense. He is chairing the National Agriculture Council of CAI. He is the vice chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Social Innovation. He has served on the NABARD's board. He was on the Indo-US Knowledge Initiative on Agriculture. He was also on the Private Sector Committee of CAIR. He is also UN Global Compact's core advisory group on sustainable agriculture business principles. So we request him to reflect on what we discussed so far and his ideas on how to take the agriculture forward in the country. Well,
very proud of him with his achievements. Congratulations. You need to be complimented.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Aneja. Thank you, Murli. Again, let me join others in thanking Dr. Aneja for I think, scintillating stories that he has shared on many different aspects in terms of whether it was fundraising or whether it was the role of Amul in a collaborative competition in a manner of speaking, and the way Dr. Subramaniam has supported, and all kinds of anecdotes and stories which bring all these years alive once again. He's also brought wonderful insights on the role of technology, role of data, role of branding, and a number of those kind of aspects. What I will do is basically try and talk about 3 takeaways in a way that will probably help inform the future of agriculture sector from everything that he talked about. While talking about those takeaways, we'll also share my thoughts on why the current problem that we currently have in agriculture, and if these takeaways probably are used, we would see a brighter future. And then a couple of reflections also on the replication of everything that Taneja spoke in other sectors of agri and allied space. So in terms of takeaways, I think one of the fundamental aspects that Taneja talked about was the commanding share of the market as a principle, design principle, and not get into production targets and so on as the primary. Obviously, they'll happen as part of serving that demand and getting that share. So I think the key takeaway or a design principle is market first. So I think what happened in our agriculture is that because of our ship-to-mouth situation, just producing more grain became overarching objective of the Indian agricultural system. Now, the world has changed since then. The consumers are seeking more variety in food, whether it is fruits and vegetables, milk, meat, or safer food, more hygienic food, and also more convenience in the way food is consumed, including the kind of example that he talked about, tomato ketchup and so on. So there is an evolution in the consumer with the expansion of the economy and increase in the per capita incomes. But the institutions that were built, the rules and legal framework that was built for agriculture has not kept pace with this change. And as a result, we continued for a long time, although transition has been occurring for the last 20 years in bits and pieces, but we remained a production-driven supply chain economy, which was fine to pull us out of ship-to-mouth economy to a self-sufficient nation in agriculture. But if we were to move towards the high-value agriculture, like you suggested, including value creation, fair redistribution, some of these kind of things that he talked about, we need to be far more demand responsive. And so the demand responsiveness can come from 2 different ways, much as milk has demonstrated. We had, as we just explained, there were key markets and the milk sheds which were supporting them. Very similarly, the consumption of fresh fruit and vegetable that happens in urban agglomerations must get linked to production centers for the fresh fruits and vegetables. And you make them demand responsive as opposed to producing some vegetables linked to last season's prices or whatever other basis on which the farmers are producing, but instead on the basis of demand. And for, of course, processed, which have no compulsion of perishability and this kind of limitation of how far they can be taken as fresh produce, then of course, world is the market. So I think this fundamental transformation of shifting into a demand responsive is a very, very key design principle that we should take from this whole milk story. And I think that transition is what we are struggling through, because we have yesterday's institutions, yesterday's vested interests, still trying to determine tomorrow's needs of the marketplace. The second takeaway is on thinking full ecosystem. Developing a minimum viable platform that the Dairy Board has done, using what is called in management parlance a wide lens, that you don't restrict yourself to just your own innovation, but ensuring that the larger ecosystem also participates with you and create a complete innovation ecosystem. Whether it was in equipment manufacturing, or in cattle feed, animal health, in packaging, in manpower development, many examples that we have cited. I think thinking full ecosystem is important rather than narrow effort on what do we do with this vegetable or that fruit or this oil seed. And I think that is the context in which, let's say much later, the MIO in oils needs to be also seen, that it was an important part of the ecosystem that was built, because the volatility in vegetable oil was operating as a key challenge. And therefore, copy-pasting a milk formula would not work. And an MIO would set a ban. And therefore, one can then influence with that limited participation, but influence the larger economy, and as a means to get both good price to the farmers as well as a fair price to the consumer. So therefore, much like some of these other things that were done in milk, an important element in the ecosystem to really succeed in the oil seeds was the MIO, and that needs to be seen in conjunction. And we say, think full ecosystem. Unfortunately, as the discussion that happened a little earlier in the conversation as to what transpired and how the vegetable oil project had to be in a way abandoned, although cooperatives do exist, and some of that is there, but it certainly has not transformed, but certainly has given some of us the foundation in seeing from inside what worked and what didn't, and therefore what we could do to the sector. And so we are implementing some of those learnings elsewhere. But thinking full ecosystem was the second takeaway. And within this, as a sub-bullets, we look at systems approach. We talked, Dr. Raja talked about why Punjab should be growing wheat and they should be growing maize. This is precisely because we are not thinking systems approach there. Because the farmers are poor, let's give water subsidy and power subsidy or a fertilizer subsidy to help. So it is a fair objective that here we have resource poor farmers, and therefore let's give them this. But then that is not a systems thinking, but just narrowly focusing on one aspect. And as a result, you end up producing water guzzling crops where we already have become hotspots of water. Same thing with sugarcane because of the prices support which is happening there. So the integral part of the entire animal husbandry, the veterinary care, and all of that is essentially productivity increase and improvement of competitiveness. We talked about the whole conversion of feed efficiency. I mean, if that productivity enhancement has not happened, obviously the naysayers would have been right. That to produce so much of milk, you need so much of land. And they don't have so much of land for fodder if you don't have land for food, because we are 17% of world's people in India, but only 2.5% of world's land resource, or just 4% of world's water resource. And therefore, this systems approach and thinking efficiency. I think some of that is missing. All this innovation does happen, but happens in silos, but not really in a manner that Dairy Board had orchestrated in case of the milk system. The integrated approach, some of this was touched in bits and pieces as to how some of the vegetable stock gets used in other way, look at the whole crop and not just the vegetable or a fruit out of it or a grain out of it. I think that really helps build the resilience in the rural ecosystem. And that's where, when Murali triggered the conversation on agroecology and linking with the integrated food, fiber and fodder and that system. So looking at that in an integrated manner is another part of this full system. And many of the models which get designed narrowly on the basis of just one output in a crop, that's where they get missed out. And consequently, the kind of challenges that we have. So that was the second takeaway in terms of think full ecosystem and not thinking the kind of trouble that we have in agriculture is what I use as some illustrations. The third, the aspect really takeaway is when you say Amul model as opposed to the milk scheme model or as opposed to whatever other model that exists, is really the 3-tier for appropriate aggregation, as much valid for every other ecosystem, because we have small farmers and we talked about 1-ton farmer or a 2-ton farmer and so on, and therefore and a few kilos farmer in case of vegetables and just a few liters in case of milk. So then that whole aggregation of production to make it a viable scale for processing and then a viable scale for marketing, I think that's another core design principle. And that is what really helps in capability induction at appropriate level. When you talk about professional managers getting inducted, an appropriate level of capabilities of those managers who work at the first year in a production cooperative and second year in union or a third year in marketing. I think all that capability induction really happens, whether it is animal husbandry for farm productivity or technology for processing and all of that, are the things like market intelligence and price risk management. And I think in the agriculture, which is somewhat, even milk has become as complicated with global markets now, volatile price of S&P impacting the price which is paid out to the farmer and so on, and even more so in agriculture. So how do you manage value is also part of this 3-tier system, whether at a second or a third tier, because there are spatial arbitrages, the temporal arbitrages, and temporal is what we spoke for MIO, and spatial in some sense when we talk about hiring tank farms and what STC was doing in some of the destinations, those kind of markets for import, are the arbitrage in the form of the farm itself in terms of processing and value addition. So therefore, this whole approach of thinking through the 3-tier and how that can be leveraged for different crops is another thing. So I would say these 3 are the critical takeaways that one could use as design principles for looking at other crops. Just a couple of reflections on replication. One of the phrases that Anuja used was the SOP for the spearhead teams. So this is how you codify what worked to then reuse for replication. Now, perhaps that success in milk is also one of the reasons why that may not have worked in some of these other crops, because an SOP that is relevant for one crop value chain is not relevant at 100% kind of phase for something else. And that's where the design principles come into play. So typically what is done is that when you have a success story like happened in milk, you actually create a playbook as opposed to an SOP, supported by a toolkit. instead of a formula. An SOP is a step-by-step formula of what needs to be done, because that's how you achieve quality in scale, even though the original inventors are not sitting in every context. But in case of multiple crops, he also talked about how so each vegetable is very different in terms of how it needs to get handled. And therefore, creating a playbook and a toolkit as opposed to an SOP is what will aid in replication in multiple contexts, because that's how we then adapt to different systems. So that is one reflection and a thought that I had. The second reflection is that Murli asked about what is an appropriate institutional structure for agriculture, having learned from all this what happened in dairy and all the new context of agriculture. So milk, given the way in which that ecosystem got developed and the way liquid milk get consumed and the grid that got created and all of that, although it was a demand led kind of a design, operationally it was still a producer led operation. You then aggregate into processing and then you aggregate into marketing. But in case of all these other crops, like the vegetables and fruits and oilseeds and grains and everything else, these are now become far more integrated globally. It is not as if post-harvest price is low and subsequently it goes up. It is not as if winter price is low and summer price is high. I think all those traditional paradigms have changed because there is an integrated global market. There are implications of freight rates globally. There are implications of exchange rates, and there are government policies and so on. And therefore, these need to be a demand-led anchoring in terms of institutions, as opposed to production-led. And one adjustment I would do as the three-tier is that with the advent of technology, not everything needs to be seen as three-tier. Some will be three, some will be two. For example, information flow can bypass the middle tier because of the advent of the apps and the super apps and information technology. Demand signals can move in two tiers. It may not be three. But the physical goods, there is no escape but to move in three tiers, because that's the level of aggregation that is required when farmers are small and at the other end, consumers are also fragmented. So in terms of how the three-tier gets reorganized because of advent of technology and because of the demand change, is the other important reflection that I have. And lastly, once again, reinforcing a point that I mentioned earlier on the global market and demand, which Dr. Nadi also talked about, is that if you take FNBL, there was also a little question that popped up on the chart screen, saying that whether our demand will expand to absorb increasing productivity. I think the headroom in productivity increase in India is far higher than the expanded production that can be absorbed in India at fair prices. And therefore, we need to look at global markets, and that, of course, will happen only when we can produce competitively. And it is also possible there's enough headroom to make it a competitive production. And therefore, look at world as a market, exports as an important anchor in this demand-led thing. So that also is another thought vis-a-vis what we have seen. So that's what I thought I would share from this wonderful talk we heard from Dr. Aneja.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Aneja, you want to say anything right now, sir?
Can I,
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Shiv Kumar. That was very good. I'm glad you got the essence of it and you contributed quite a bit to it. Thank you very much. I have one comment to make, even on the dairy sector. That is, India has not looked at our advantages in the global market. We produce bulk of world's buffalo milk. And the mozzarella cheese market is expanding like nobody's business, because the pizza itself is becoming such a huge market all over. And the best pizza can be made really only with buffalo milk. And it's a great pity that we have not realized it. Italians are keeping buffaloes to produce, pizza.
Okay.
Some minor attempts have been made here. And I think the opening there is buffalo milk is not even considered milk in the international trade, because milk is defined as cow's milk. So you overcome many of these issues because it's buffalo milk. And I feel sad that nothing really has happened, nothing big has happened on this. I thought I will mention that. The other thing, which is the bee in my bonnet all the time, is that we have done nothing on Indian sweets. Even today, 10% of India's milk is converted into khoa, paneer, etc., etc. And that is a huge 20 million tons. And all the money is made by the halwais. And people are losing faith in it because there's so much adulteration in the market. So if you have a branded product, it is, it is free from adulteration. And that is because we didn't have technologies to produce these on very large scale. Now those technologies are available. And you can produce these products on very large scale and export. So I see no reason as to why shouldn't India's dairy sector be ignoring this. And I think it's a mindset. It is really the inferiority complex. I remember if you talk to somebody that you made Gorgonzola cheese, they'll feel so impressed with you. But if you said you're working on gulab jamuns, they don't think much of you. So you think about it. It's a great pity that we have left the whole field to Haldirams and Mirchi Rams and others. The fact is that is probably the most paying part of the whole chain. And I would tell my colleagues in the marketing system within our system at Anand that you can only sell wood, milk powder, butter which is stored in -20. You can't sell products which have a shelf life of a week or two. You can sell milk, but you can't sell, I'm glad to see dahi getting a very large share now. And you can't sell Indian sweets which have a smaller shelf life. Sure, there is technology available to increase shelf life, and there is standardization available. There are many things that can be done, but I feel sad that that's one of the unfinished dream part of the thing.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, this is in some sense captures the way forward for the larger agriculture for the model. So based on the model of milk in Operation Flood and Operation Golden Flow, Dairy Board, if you have to translate that to all agriculture, 365 days, roughly this is the model. I will not go into this, but that's the sense. I shared this presentation. Now I hand over to Madhumurthy to wrap up and say a vote of thanks. Before that, I say thanks to AP Mass for giving us the Zoom link. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Murali. Maybe before that, I just have a quick question to Shivakumar sir. So basically, these agroecological or climate resilient services or whatever. So do you think, sir, they can make some business model for FPOs? Let us say if they take millets. So and with these kind of approaches, particularly the agroecological services and all, can FPOs take up some business proposition by it?
Yeah, basically, it all has to be linked to demand at the end of the day, because it's a question of intersection between what is producible, keeping in mind the entire climate resilience as well as the agroclimatic limitation play with the demand side. And in case you need to produce a lot more of something compared to demand, it's important that in the federated structure, somebody is working on the demand side. to be able to create that. So I think it needs to be a demand-linked management of the back end. So that is a critical essence. I mean, certainly we can't ignore and say just because there is demand, you just intensify production with whatever be the input that are used. That is also unsustainable. So therefore, it needs to be a demand responsive and yet keeping the limitations of the agroecology conditions as well as the climate resilience. So that's why the three-tier need to be very, very interactive in really making this a sustainable approach.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
Madhumurthy will propose vote of thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So basically, like so this event, when Murali first proposed and Shivakumar sir, also suggested very strongly that having Dr. Ram Maneja, so can be very revealing because Dr. Ram Maneja can give a really ring-side view of the operation flat, the dairy board, the edible oils, so F&B, MIO, and all that. And so now we had that wonderful event. So thank you all very much. So yeah, let me just take a minute. Yeah, it's already so 10 minutes past 8 o'clock here. In extending sincere thanks to each and every one of you on behalf of IRMA Alumni Association, Hyderabad chapter. So the first and foremost, Dr. Ram Maneja. So thank you, sir, very much. And as our couple of colleagues mentioned, it is very early in the morning that the winter has already crept in there. Definitely, as many of you are aware, so they're 12 hours behind the time, Indian time, at Vancouver in Canada. So in spite of all that, Dr. Ram Maneja has given the time and the experience of listening by anecdotes, by experiences and all. So that is very enriching and revealing. So thank you, sir, very much. And Mr. Shivakumar, giving, so in spite of his very hectic schedule, so encouraging us to take up this event and preparing for this and giving his time for the event. And actually summing up the kind of takeaways, the kind of the key reflections from the today's talk, whatever, starting with market and the kind of scale, the viability that is required, and very importantly, the kind of integrated ecosystem approach that Mr. Shivakumar was mentioning, which is very highly relevant to us. Where the agriculture is going through a very critical phase of the sustainability, in terms of sustainability, whether in terms of the chemical imports of water or fodder or feed and all these. So these kind of so that is a very great summing up of the takeaways and reflections from Mr. Shivakumar. Thank you, sir, very much for that. And my colleagues Satish, so Satish Kumar, and Sashivardhan, so who all really made all this preparation for the webinar, the kind of technical arrangements, so the kind of logistics, so that they have made and all that, and my many other colleagues in the core group of the IRMA alumni. And all the members of IRMA alumni, Hyderabad chapter, and our other like-minded individuals and all who made this event possible. And last and very importantly, all the participants who have joined in today's webinar. So taking out your time and all. So thank you each and everyone for making it a very highly effective webinar. So we will share you the YouTube link, share across everyone. So yeah, Murali already shared that. To go through this one, to disseminate this very useful talks by Dr. Ramanuja and Mr. Shivakumar. Thank you one and all, and look forward for your physical presence in our next physical event at Hyderabad next Saturday, 20th of this month. So look forward to many of you to participate in this meeting again. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very kindly. This has been a blessing.
Muralidhar, for guiding us, making this event happen, and
No, it is a blessing to meet my
moderating
friends. Yeah, it is a
this
blessing.
one.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murali.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Shiv, sir. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. We'll trouble you again, sir. 2-3 times. more.
Anytime.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Literally anytime.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Yes, sir. Sir, we'll meet you on 20th, sir. Shiv, sir.
Right. See you, Murali. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Nidya. Bye. See you, Madhumurthy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madhu.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Krishna Gopal. Yeah. He left, I think. Where is Satish and yeah.
Sashi, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I think
Thank you very much.
it went pretty smooth and it was really
Yeah.
nice as well.
Yeah, slightly deviated from the script, but what I can't help.
Yes.
Fine. Yeah.
But even those anecdotes were like really interesting.
Yeah.
It was good, sir. I think like to thank Madhu sir and his team, Shashi also. It was
Right.
perfectly seamless.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And there are no big ifs and buts. That's why it made nice. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And
Sure,
anyway, we circulate the YouTube everywhere. So
Yeah. Yes.
we have done our bit. Madhu, now the 20th. We wait for the 20th.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think we should recognize some people and felicitate if possible on 20th, Madhumurthy. Just think about it, reflect on that.
Yeah. Let us see.
Yeah. Even if you recognize 5-6 people, it's okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right, boss. Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Right. Thank you very much. Thanks to AP Mas also.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Murray, sir. Thank you. You didn't speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, sir. Thank you.